8 minutes after 10 o'clock, getting a tiny bit late start, and that's okay. Robin, are we giving tickets away to the Daytona 500 this year? I know usually we do.
Yeah, usually we do, so I'm looking forward to finding out about that.
Usually we do, and of course it's a huge sport around here, and how do I know it's huge? Because I work in radio, and this is what I mean by that. In the past, because we carry the race on... Actually, we carry many NASCAR races, not just the Daytona 500. We carry it on the air here. And it doesn't matter who else was the big shot on the air at the time, whether it was Rush Limbaugh or you just name it, Sean Hannity, any of the biggies, right? If something goes wrong, that's when you get phone calls. Mm-hmm. So the one that got the most phone calls was NASCAR. Yeah. Like, in other words, our signal goes down or something happens or a commercial plays at the wrong time, glitches happen, right? And you're working at the station at that time, you better be prepared for people to just tell you off. They have no problem telling you off. Exactly. NASCAR is huge. And I've always admired, actually, the broadcast that the Motor Racing Network does, because it is probably the most skillful broadcast, just knowing how seamless it sounds and knowing what must go into it. I mean, they toss it because they're all around the track, the announcers. They're at all different locations. Yeah. And they're all telling what they see, and then they stop, and the next one starts, and then you have that sound going on in the background. So NASCAR is fascinating to our listeners, as it is to me. John Havick is on the phone. He's written a book that you're going to love if you are enjoying what I'm talking about. The book is called The Ghosts of NASCAR. John Havick is an historian. He's a researcher, and the subtitle of The Ghosts of NASCAR is The Harlan Boys and the First Daytona 500. Fascinating stuff. Everybody loves this kind of stuff. Good morning, John Havick. Thank you for being on the show with us today.
Good morning.
And where are you? Where are you calling from?
I live in Stone Mountain, Georgia now. I grew up in the Midwest, in Iowa and Nebraska.
Oh, really?
And, yeah, but I've lived in Atlanta area for years now, so it seems like home.
So the first Daytona 500 was on the sand, right? Not where it is now. There was no raceway, obviously.
Well, actually, you're right about the sand being the first place where they ran a Daytona race of big consequence. But the first Daytona 500 was in '59, and they built this huge track for it. Bill France, the NASCAR president, had built this huge track, several $1 million cost, and they came off the beach in '59. People were wanting to build condos, and the beach was unsatisfactory because if the waves and the tides didn't work properly, and you would have a rough beach.
Yeah, I could imagine that. Yeah, that was probably okay. So I'm a little embarrassed because I'm sure that was a dumb question. Of course, the 500-mile race on the sand probably wouldn't have been practical. But how far did they go on the sand?
Well, they went. The course was about 4.1 miles, and they would go down. The south part would be on a 2-lane highway. And then they would turn and and they'd go up the beach.
Okay.
So and so it ended up being approximately 2 miles on the beach and 2 miles on the and they just stop everything else and use the highway.
So I'm guessing that was A1A, the highway, right?
Yeah, I think so. And there's still like a south turn bar, I believe or a north turn bar. And
really?
I've been there. Yeah, you can kind of see some of the old pictures and things, and do that. But it was a big deal to come off the beach and have this huge track that was actually larger than the Indianapolis Speedway in distance around. And this was quite a moment for racing to have this big, huge track.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Yeah, that part. Yeah, but people back then, they didn't really the drivers and mechanics and things. They didn't really know how big it was going to be. The beach race had always been fun and it attracted a lot of people and was a big race. And they had a lot of other events surrounding that period of time. They'd come in there and do measured miles. The man I wrote about, Johnny Bucamp, in '57, he went to the beach race. He got second in the beach race in '57 and beat all the NASCAR drivers but one. And And a couple days before, they ran these mile time test runs on with Corvettes and things, and he drove a Corvette and got second in one of the different events there with a Corvette. So there were other races and things that went on the beach besides this oval circuit that they created.
Okay, now, and you pronounce his name Bucamp?
Yeah, I do. The family did, and since I grew up in Iowa, and my great grandfather lived in this little town in Harlan, and where these guys all came from, and I always heard it as Bucamp, but people are out in the hinterlands. They pronounce it Beauchamp and Beauchamp, and he didn't ever fight back. He just let people pronounce it.
Say it any way you want.
However they wanted.
Oh, that's funny.
It wasn't. From all I can tell, it was not significant to him. But I just always heard Bucamp, and I checked with his brother, who was still alive when I was writing the book, and his brother said, yeah, that's how the family pronounced it. But I'm sure the brother had the same, Gaylord was his name, he had the same problems.
Yeah, right.
People pronouncing the name different ways.
So you might be one of the few people who actually could write this book. I mean, you actually know the people that you're writing about. You're a researcher as well, but in this case, you know the people.
I felt that the story had been sitting there for about 50 years, and no one had done it. And I felt that I'd actually watched them race. I'd taken photos of Johnny Bucamp and the cars and the adversaries. I'd taken photos of them because I'd attend these races. And Johnny Bucamp had driven my grandfather's passenger car. That was his first stock car.
Oh, wow.
My grandfather sold it, traded it, and it was after the Second World War, and my grandfather farmed around Harlan, Iowa, and so anyway, that drew me into the races, watching my grandfather's car as it turned into a race car, and then I watched Tiny Lund race, Tiny Lund became a big star in NASCAR, and he also lived in Harlan, Iowa, and so the book, this Ghosts of NASCAR book, traces this early period that a lot of the racing fans really don't know about, and they don't know anything about Johnny Bucamp. They just hear the name. He got second, or he almost won the Daytona 500, but they don't really know anything about him. And he was a big champion in the Midwest. They called him the national champion up there, and he won in '56. He won 38 late model races, racing from Shreveport to up into Canada.
Oh, wow.
Through the center of the country in a Chevrolet, and at that same time, the Chevrolets in NASCAR won 3 races. So during that '56 season, in the big competitive circuit, Chevrolet got 3 wins in NASCAR and 38 in the Midwest IMCA Racing Association, which was at that time reasonably comparable to NASCAR. And, not now, but at that time it was. And so Bucamp was a big star, and people thought of him as the national champion. And he comes down to Daytona, to the beach, the sand race in '57, and gets second. So, he was a formidable adversary.
So he officially got second, but was that debatable? What I was reading, it sounded like everybody didn't agree.
Well, then when we moved back to the big race in '59, when they come off the beach and they're on this big track.
Was the track built where it is now? Was it the same location?
Yes, absolutely. It's like sacred ground by this time.
Yeah.
They've had a lot of they've had deaths and crashes and fights and everything out there on that track. So the first big one comes there, and he comes to race, and curiously, the mechanic that had put both he and Tiny Lund as big stars in the Midwest, Dale Swanson was his name. People were buying engines from him all over the Midwest. They come in and wanted, but Swanson didn't have a car in this '59 race, and Ford or NASCAR had allowed Thunderbirds into this first big race, kind of a sports car, but they had allowed it in, and one of the big adversaries of Bucamp and Swanson both were these Burdicks. Their name was Burdick, Burdick, and there were about 3 of them. They were all very good, and they had a Thunderbird. They'd bought a Thunderbird from the Charlotte Ford Company or the Charlotte Race Ford Company, Holman Moody, and so Roy Burdick, the mechanic, basically hired his adversary to come in and, ask his, and so here Bucamp and this Burdick teamed up, and they raced this Thunderbird in the first Daytona 500. Well, Bucamp, by lap 43, Fireball Roberts had to go out of the race. He was in front, and other people had led, but Bucamp was just kind of lingering around there near the front, and he got he took the lead in lap 43. It's a 200-lap race now because it's 2.5 miles around the track.
Okay.
So he was in front. So the rest of the race, Johnny Bucamp raced either like first, second, or third, basically. Most of the race, he was right there close to the front. Well, suddenly, but on lap 149, suddenly Lee Petty appears out of nowhere. Now that's the first thing. See, where did he come from? How does he suddenly get right beside Johnny Bucamp?
Yeah, really.
The journalism was not the same as it is today. I mean, that some of the things that went on just simply would have been investigated, and questions would have been asked, and things would have been reported. But anyway, suddenly Lee Petty's right there beside Bucamp, and for the next 50 laps, there they are racing alongside
50 laps.
Each other.
Wow.
Yeah, 50 laps, but there they go, and on the last lap they kind of flash across the finish line, very close together, and it looked to everyone but the owner of NASCAR that Lee Petty was about a foot in front of, and the flagman. It looked, the official flagman who was experienced, the owner of NASCAR, Bill France, and the flagman both thought Bucamp won. But everyone watching thought that Lee Petty had crossed a lap or two, a foot or two in front. Well, that's the next thing. What were these two guys, the experienced race guys, blind, or what was going on?
Yeah.
Well, they went ahead and gave Bucamp the trophy. He kissed the girl. Usually about 5 seconds he took with her, and he was known for that. If he won, he was going to get more than the trophy.
That's great.
Now you have to know he was about 6'2", and he was really handsome, and so it wasn't too big a chore for the girl probably to do this. But he was a good-sized guy, handsome-looking guy. Anyway, so he gets the win. Well, then that night in the Daytona TV studio, after they had dinner and cleaned up, Bucamp's there in the TV studio being interviewed, and the owner of NASCAR comes in. He'd already sent telegrams out, the owner of NASCAR had, and he said, "Hold everything. It might be Lee Petty won the race."
Oh, no.
And so then 3 days go by, and they decide that Lee Petty went across the finish line first, they say. Well, this is what happened. That's all. Now, that's what the papers reported. Well, in the pits, right after the race, the Bucamp pits, Burdick and all those guys, they said that Lee Petty was a lap behind. They were their pit stall was
a
very
lap
close
behind?
to
A full lap?
A full lap behind. Yeah.
Oh,
maybe
wow.
even possibly 2 laps behind. They were right. Their pits were close enough together so they could see how often the cars pitted. Bucamp had no trouble on the track. He only changed one tire. Some of the cars changed tires like 9 times. They had to stop. Every time they stopped, it was 90 seconds probably, and so that would be a full lap at the speeds they were going. And therefore, if you made an extra pit stop or 2, you were going to be a lap behind. And Petty had been racing in the before that lap, about lap 140. He was behind a car that finished a lap behind. So on lap one.
Okay, so are those fighting words for somebody who's a Petty fan?
Yeah.
Well, they were fighting words even at the pits then. I asked these guys about it, and they were still alive, and they said, we were always fighting about something. They said, after a race, we were always arguing, fighting over something. But they were arguing about it, and other drivers also, besides these pits, thought and believed that Lee Petty was a lap behind. They said that right there in the pits, that they thought a lap, maybe at one of his pit stops, hadn't been counted. Well, then the thing. How do you get what happens? How do you get that lap? If you were a lap behind, how do suddenly you do it? Well, they have a clock there. What they did was they had volunteers count the laps, and the wives of the drivers usually counted their husband's laps. If you had a girlfriend, she counted. Okay, now you're starting to see what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the wives.
That's a lap dance of a different color. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so every time the car went by, they had a clock, and they recorded the time of the lap one. You record what time the car passed the clock, and so forth. So you can even kind of reconstruct the race. But if you have a clever lap counter and they subtract 10 seconds off your time for 9 laps or so, and then just add 2 back on there, after you've gained you can quickly gain a lap. And or if you just record the pit stop as a lap, I should think that might also work. Wow. So anyway, the rumors were floating around that Lee Petty was having an extra lap added. So, I was still trying to decide if any of this might be so to write it up in the book. And then I started looking, and people were telling me this, too. I was interviewing people. They were saying that this was going on,
right. Or
there were rumors of it going on. Well, then I looked, there's printed documents if you research this stuff. Well, in 1958, near Charlotte, there was a race. And this was a year before the Daytona 500. Almost the same thing happened. The victims were Curtis Turner and Speedy Thompson. But people watched those two guys lead the race, the whole race, and then Lee Petty demands a lap count after the race. Sure enough, he had one more lap, and Curtis Turner, and then Curtis Turner afterwards says, Elizabeth Petty, that was Lee Petty's wife, has the fastest pencil in racing.
Oh no! This is great.
So this is a year before, and then Speedy Thompson, this second place car that was also clipped on this deal. He said that if they can beat you like this in a race, then there's just almost no point in even bothering with this.
Right.
You're paraphrasing. Yeah. I mean, that's one to see. These guys think it's kind of just clever if you slip a little dishonest part in the engine and you actually beat everybody. But if you just have somebody out over on the side just changing the result, that's not even close
crazy.
To a race.
Oh man, that's a great story. So
there was one other thing. But Bill France, the owner of NASCAR, what he did was he wrote his own little book about his racing operation, and with a co-author, came out in about 1965, 64, and in that book, he claimed that Johnny Bucamp had followed Lee Petty for most of the race, the 59 race.
Oh.
And to me,
but you were there, right?
Well, it was the other way around. And everybody saw it. It was all reported in the paper. So why would the owner of NASCAR write up a scenario, an account of that race that was so contrary to the truth? And so all this evidence just builds, and I wrote it up, let people decide for themselves. But there's even other evidence, so if people can read this Ghosts of NASCAR.
You've got a hit book on your hands. John Havick is who you've been listening to. His book is called The Ghosts of NASCAR, The Harlan Boys and the First Daytona 500. And I just have one question that I'm still stuck on, going back to where the the flagman and the other guys saw the Mr. Bucamp. Is that my saying right?
Yeah, Johnny Bucamp.
He passed first, even with the lap. It's still at that point in the finish line. Well, it sounded like they still saw him go through first.
Yeah.
Well, that was what people thought, and at the time, people thought that the two officials saw Bucamp cross the finish line first. But there were 12 Southern reporters right on the finish line, and Fireball Roberts was there. Okay. They all believed that Lee Petty had crossed first, and but it almost works. See, it kind of works to what I seem to think, because, or what, if you believe that Bucamp probably should have won on because of lap counting, because. France just didn't waver. Everybody thought that Lee Petty went across first. France didn't say anything, from what I can see. He just said, no, Bucamp won, and he just went on in there and did it. Of course, he had been involved in resolving that 58 race. He'd come in on that, and so he had, from Bill France, the owner of NASCAR, had to have known there was a rumor going around about the adding of laps with Lee Petty's card. So he had to wonder at that time, I should think, what Lee Petty's lap card looked like. But he said, no, Bucamp won. Well, he wasn't. The owner of NASCAR was not doing the cheating, but he had to figure out what to do about it. And so. I mean, he had his own. It was not the same as it is today.
Oh, man!
And so he had a lot of stuff that he'd been pulling. Bill France had. He'd done his own. He had his own issues that people were accusing of this and that and the other thing. But if you look at the race and think, well, the flagman and Bill France were pretty sure that Lee Petty was a lap behind, and they were just it made for a good show there. Everything, those guys flashing across the finish line at the same time, but and that's what really makes sense. Now, some of the NASCAR people now claim that Bill France's flagman couldn't see who went across first. It doesn't make sense. To me, it doesn't make sense. Why would they decide and if they couldn't see who?
Yeah,
who
really.
Won, they would have checked with some people or something. They wouldn't have just been so sure that Bucamp went across or won the race.
And is Lee Petty related to the other Pettys that are currently?
Yeah. Richard is the son. See, in 1960, Lee Petty took a race away from his own son. It was in
really?
It was in 1959.
So that means his mother was using the pencil against him too?
There you go.
Well, it kind of looked like that to me. It was in Atlanta at the Lakewood track. A month after that big 59 race, Bucamp came up to Atlanta at the historic Lakewood track, and he lapped the entire NASCAR field and won the race. But later in that year, Lee Petty protested a race that Richard. It would have been Richard's first win as a NASCAR driver. Lee Petty protested. They had a rule that's, and the papers reporting of this, the Atlanta Constitution reporting of this is just very interesting. You can read a lot of the story. Yeah.
Well, we've enjoyed the visit so much, John. Thank you for being on the air with us. The book again is called The Ghosts of NASCAR. John Havick is the author. How do we get the book? And do you have a website?
Yeah, I have it's www.ghostsofnascar.com, and you can find out more about it. Also, Amazon has the book. You can get it from the University of Iowa Press that published the book and really helped me clean it up the last draft or two. So I'd put it through about 10 drafts, and then the research was fun. The writing, I put it through 10 drafts, but the last two were the University of Iowa drafts. So anyway, you can find it, and Barnes & Noble has it, and some of them do. Some of the stores do, I know.
Well, John, thank you for being on the air. We've been all ears. This has been such a great story you've told, and thank you for being on the air. So now you're changing the Trivial Pursuit game. And there's a card in Trivial Pursuit that says, who won the first NASCAR, and it says Lee Petty.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
we'll see whether NASCAR ever changes the outcome. It's kind of like Lance Armstrong or some of these guys.
Yes.
I don't.
Yeah.
Anyway,
John, thank you again for being on the air with us. Good luck with everything you're doing, and you're definitely welcome back anytime.
All right, thank you. Call me anytime.
Great interview. We'll take a little break, and we'll be right back.
Robin, you look tired.
I am. I've been running all over town.
Why? Why not drive?
I need to get the stupid document notarized.
Well, that's easy. You need personal service.
Duh, that's what I've been looking for.
You need to go see Mark at the Personal Service Center. He can notarize that for you, make copies, fax it wherever, or send it out in the mail. Heck, he can even